We can talk a little bit about the California primary, which is today. If you live in California, voting is until 8 p.m. If you haven't voted yet, get in your car, drop it off at a ballot box, go in person. It's too late to do it by mail at this point. As you all know, the Supreme Court has made it so you can't even sue the Postal Service for not delivering your mail. And I know there's lots of other primaries across the country, so be sure to vote if you haven't. I know all of us here are so politically tuned in, so I'm sure all of us have done all of that. But if not, take the time, go vote, and we could talk about the California primaries afterwards. But I want to talk about Trump, Todd Blanche, the DOJ, the settlement fund. There is a lot going on. And I have a take on it. Are you all surprised? I have a take on it. And I think there's some really interesting stuff. So as we know, on Friday, Judge Kathleen Williams in Miami, she was asked, this was where the lawsuit was filed, the one where Trump asked for $10 billion from his own government, from the American people, right? For that leak of his tax returns. He filed it in Miami. He got an Obama-appointed judge, Judge Kathleen Williams, and she asked the question. So this is the order of things. Trump filed his motion in January, filed his initial lawsuit. Then he asked the judge for a 90-day extension to give the DOJ more time to respond. Instead of just automatically giving it, the judge calendared May 20th and asked both sides to actually even argue whether or not she could take the case. Did a real case or controversy exist according to the Constitution? You need both personal jurisdiction and subject matter jurisdiction in order for a judge to take the case. One, does that judge have jurisdiction over you? You as a person, you as a corporation. Do you do business there? Do you live there? Is this the proper court? Should it be in state court? Should it be in federal court? Should it be in a federal court in a different jurisdiction altogether? And then, do they have subject matter jurisdiction? And that's similar. Should this be filed in a federal court? Is this over a federal law, or is this a state law issue? In this case, she said, it doesn't even look like there's a controversy. It looks like you're suing yourself. And she quoted Trump's own words that he gave on a press conference on Air Force One, where he said, I'm suing myself. So she quoted that. And she asked both sides to proceed. She didn't dismiss it. She gave them both a shot to respond. And in a normal situation, a defendant would have grabbed that opportunity, argued why this case should be dismissed. I mean, after all, they're being asked to pay $10 billion. But Todd Blanche and his representation of the IRS and the American people failed to do that and instead rushed this settlement agreement. So Todd Blanche, without filing one motion, agreed to a $1.8 billion slush fund, and then filed an addendum waiving liability to Trump. So fast forward, Trump filed this voluntary motion to dismiss without prejudice. She dismissed the case. Then the 35 former federal judges asked her to reopen it, said a fraud was committed on the court because they basically, settled this case. He said this was a voluntary motion to dismiss, but they are telling the American people that this is a settlement. So she on Friday asked Trump stunningly. I mean, I was so pleasantly surprised, but surprise is the key word here, that she had the guts, the courage to ask Trump to file a brief by mid-June, I think it was June 12th, to answer whether or not he colluded with his own government to commit fraud on the court. That is the language she used. We are not in Trump 1.0, folks, anymore. We're not even in the Biden era, where Merrick Garland took forever to open up a criminal investigation into Trump. It is Merrick Garland's fault, not the Supreme Court, for the fact that Trump is not in jail. The Supreme Court did not preclude any criminal trial against Trump. Jack Smith revised his indictment and was able to move forward. Did he have to go back to the grand jury? Did he have to perhaps not include so many of the charges against him? Sure. But he went back, he got the indictment, It was moving forward. And then, of course, the election happened. It was not out of the realm of possibility that this was going to go to the Supreme Court. I mean, my gosh, they were criminally charging a president for the first time in our history. Like, of course it was going to go to the Supreme Court. And Jack Smith, when he went to the Supreme Court on this issue, did not ask for it to be expedited. That was why it took them so long to come up with their decision. Merrick Garland was so afraid of this appearing political that we ended up with Trump running again. But anyway, that's a little bit of a side note. We're not in that era anymore. There's no way, I believe, that a federal judge would have asked Trump whether or not the sitting president in his personal capacity colluded with the most powerful lawyer in America, the attorney general. That would not have happened. They would have thought this was offensive to ask a sitting president to do. They would have thought this was against tradition. It just wasn't going to happen. So we are in a different era, folks. That, to me, was the most positive takeaway from that Friday, is we are in an era where people and judges are willing to face the reality of a situation and not overly defer to the person that's in office. Because frankly, a lot of other countries, I believe it was with South Korea, right? They put their prime minister on trial within like a week of what he did. If we don't want a monarch in office, we have to stop treating our president like monarchs. They only deserve the deference that they earn. They should not get a deference just by the mere fact of the power that they are using with our power that we are loaning them. So anyway, so Kathleen Williams did this. And then sure enough, all of a sudden, Monday, Axios, which Axios has done a lot of reporting by Trump's bidding. So it's super interesting it came from them. But Axios came out and said that after a talk with Mike Johnson, Trump realized that there's no political will for this. And he was going to like basically voluntarily let go of this idea of the slush fund. And at the same time, the Department of Justice put out a statement saying that they were going to comply with the DC order because there was a few lawsuits in DC that tried to stop the creation of the slush fund. And one of them had a preliminary injunction of about 2 weeks, or maybe it was a TRO of 2 weeks to pause the creation of the fund while the litigation moved forward. The Department of Justice, which has ignored about 100 immigration orders or 100 orders related to ICE, all of a sudden put out a statement saying that they were going to completely stop to try to enforce the settlement agreement. I believe that it wasn't politics and it wasn't this preliminary injunction, that it was this order in Florida where he was going to answer whether or not there was a fraud on the court. Because clearly Todd Blanche committed malpractice. Clearly that is a fraud. To agree to a settlement of that size without filing one motion in defense, you cannot call it anything else. You cannot, I mean, if you or I tried to sue the government, do you think that would happen even close to that? So I believe that he actually was afraid, even with the some of the immunity he has as the president. He does not have absolute immunity. He sued that in his personal capacity. Any fraudulent consequences of fraud, he would have to suffer as a personal capacity. So Todd Blanche went in front of Congress today and confirmed that they plan on walking away from that slush fund. And I believe they are doing it because they do not want the consequence of having committed a fraud on the court. And it is just like, everything is all smoke and mirrors, right? And this is his way of saying, I'm stepping back, right? But really, it's because I believe he's trying to get out of the bigger problem of having to answer whether or not he committed fraud on a court, which is very serious, not only for him, but very serious for Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche, unlike Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi is licensed to practice law in the state of Florida. State of Florida has something called like a shield law, which says that if you are this confirmed DOJ official, you cannot have a bar association investigation open up to for your license. But Todd Blanche is licensed in the state of New York. And New York doesn't have that shield law. And so much so that the Department of Justice is actually trying to create a policy to have a blanket shield for wherever a DOJ lawyer is practicing. It came out in March, this draft policy, and it says that before the state in which the lawyer is licensed to practice law can open up an investigation, the DOJ itself has to investigate and the Attorney General has to decide whether or not this has enough merit to move forward. So, of course, Todd Blanche, who already has a few complaints against him in the state of New York, this would benefit him as Attorney General. I believe that this action that he just took with this settlement fund is by far the most glaring what action as a lawyer to get him disbarred. And he is not shielded by the fact that he's still in the Department of Justice. The New York Bar Association wrote a letter in the public comments that said that they believe that a lawyer in the Department of Justice should have to follow the facts and the law and should be subject to the same types of investigations as any other lawyer. New York Bar Association not playing around. So I believe that order Friday actually scared Todd Blanche and actually scared Trump. And this is why they're changing. And they're trying to pretend they're doing it for some sort of favor. What Judge Kathleen Williams is going to do at the end will be interesting because technically, they did commit the fraud. Is it moot if they've decided now not to do the settlement fund? It makes it a whole heck of a lot less of a reason for her to move forward when at the end of the day, they're withdrawing the thing that was fraudulent. Now, let's get into the waiver of the audits, because I did a little bit of a deep dive on this. And I actually am wondering if a lot of the discussion around this waiver is wrong. The reporting I've been seeing about it is that it is in relation to an audit, that the IRS is, okay, also let's make this really clear. The settlement agreement came out, and then the next day was this addendum. So that's the other thing that's going to be kind of like whether or not they want to say the fraud in the court was just the settlement agreement and not this addendum might be the case because the settlement agreement that they laid out in their court filing did not include the waiver of the audit. So they might say to the judge that it is moot because the settlement was just the slush fund and this waiver was perhaps like some sort of just good faith action that they took because it was a separate addendum, not part of what they called the settlement agreement. So I think that's going to be their cute way of trying to get out of explaining why there's a fraud in the court. They're going to say, this is moot. We no longer have the settlement agreement because the waiver of the audits was not included in that settlement agreement. So they have something here. It's dated May 19th. Office of Attorney General does not have any settlement agreement. They refer to the settlement agreement, but they don't say specifically that this is part of it. They just refer to it. The reason why I'm actually very concerned about this, how it's getting reported, is I don't think it's limited to a waiver of just audits. I mean, how I started practicing law was drafting contracts, drafting agreements like this. The wording is so careful, so careful. Lawyers are so careful with the wordings. I do believe that this is not a future waiver. I know there's some back and forth about that. The Department of Justice is saying it's not future. I know there's some concerns around Democrats that it's a future. I do not think by the language it's future. You can tell that because in the language it says that they're waiving pretty much everything, right? Waiving all claims, counterclaims, causes of action, appeals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a long list. But then they say, as of the effective date of the settlement agreement that have been or could have been asserted by the defendant. So I believe that the waiver is up and until this May 19th, 2026, that this is not a future. It says it is forever barred, but they are still talking about actions that were taken, because you have statute of limitations, right? So somebody theoretically could take an action, could sue somebody 5 years from now, but it's an action that you took today. So let me know if you could text if that doesn't make sense, but it's an action that he took to May 19th. Prosecutions, but it have to be that. You're not waiving actions that, let's say, he does 2 years from now. But the reason why I don't know, frankly, why people assumed this was just a waiver of audits is because, and honestly, I don't even know I think they're even trying to waive criminal prosecution. I don't even think they're just trying to waive civil prosecution. I mean, this is how broad the language is. The language says, the United States releases, waives, acquits, and forever discharges the plaintiffs from, quote, prosecuting or pursuing any and all claims, counterclaims, causes of action, appeals, or requests for any relief, including injunctive relief, monetary relief, damages, examinations, or similar or related reviews, appeals, debt relief, costs, attorney's fees, expenses, or interest. I mean, to be honest, that is so broad. I don't know if that means that they're also waiving criminal prosecution. They use the word prosecuting. There is nothing in that limiting them, okay? That's the difference. Like if a lawyer is going to draft something broad, or you're going to draft it to limit it, that you are drafting purposely broad. They are not limiting. They aren't saying something like it's only related to claims, notwithstanding criminal prosecution. They're not using that language. They are doing it very broad. And the reason why I think this has to do with more than just audits, and it is just also more than just Trump, right? It's including Trump, related or affiliated individuals, including without limitation, that's trying to make it extra broad, family or other filing jointly, or parties, including trusts, parents, sister, or related companies, affiliates, and subsidiaries. So they talk about matters relating to the actual case at hand, which is the Trump suing related to the IRS leak, or his suit pending agency claims, which is his claims against the Mar-a-Lago FBI raid. Anything related to lawfare and or weaponization, which is very vague, but they also are relating to anything related to any matters currently pending or that could be pending, including tax returns filed before the effective date before defendants or other agencies or departments. That language is why I think this is not just about an IRS audit. Todd Blanche has just given Trump and his subsidiaries and his family the ability to not have any civil liability and perhaps even any criminal liability against any matters against the IRS or any agency or department of the government. That is how broad that is. So I do not know why so much of the reporting is limited to an IRS audit. You could argue that some of that language seems to be about an IRS audit, right? Because they talked about including tax returns, right? But they're not saying just tax returns. They're saying including tax returns. So that's kind of scary stuff. And I think that needs to be talked about more. And that's why I wanted to talk about this on the Substack because, you know, probably the Attorney General of the United States does have the ability to waive some liability. I mean, we are in uncharted territory here, right? We're definitely in uncharted territory. Whether or not, though, the Attorney General could give immunity to somebody, I mean, the government gives immunity to people all the time, right? They give them criminal immunity for if they're testifying against somebody else at trial or turning state's evidence. They give civil immunity all the time to make a deal. It's not out of the realm of possibility that the Attorney General could give Trump and his family, subsidiaries, criminal and civil immunity. And if we're talking about not just the IRS, what are we talking about? Insider trading, information that they received from the NSA, let's say, or actions related to the FBI? I mean, we don't really know all the stuff that they're doing with the government. We don't really know all of the claims that could be made, all the laws that they may be violating with respect to the Treasury Department, right? Or like the FTC and the anti-monopoly. We don't really know. I mean, my gosh, Don Jr. just getting that like Pentagon fund. We don't really even know. And so this idea of waiving anything, any claims that the US government can have against them based on action that they've taken is disturbing and very, very broad. This is very broad. So I think that calling this an IRS audit waiver, although is true, I think is too limiting because they didn't write it that limiting. They could have easily just said before defendants, right? If you wanted it to just be about the IRS, you would have ended it right there. You could have said they're waiving anything before defendants, but they said or other agencies or departments. And they didn't just say pending. So that could be the pending IRS audit, but they said any matters currently pending or that could be pending. So basically any civil claim and possibly criminal claim that any department or agency in the entire United States could have against whatever Trump has done until this time. So we gotta talk about this, folks. Definitely be sure to comment, like this, send this around. I think this is even more alarming than what we're talking about. And from Todd Blanche's testimony to Congress, it appears that they plan on sticking with. They plan on sticking with this, and they are trying to, I believe, get out of accountability with the judge because of the fact that this was not part of the settlement agreement, quote, settlement agreement. And they are going to say that releasing somebody from liability was part of I mean, it's a harder argument to make that they could not release somebody from a tax liability in order to settle a lawsuit. I mean, it's much harder to say, oh, I'm giving a fund of $2 billion for this lawsuit. But Attorney General, we give them latitude. And this is a really extreme waiver of liability. And I believe this is why they are holding on to this, because I believe Trump knows that people will probably go after him again and his family. I mean, he's acting lawless. He doesn't actually care. And he does, I believe, expect his attorney general to give him a CYA. And I believe that's what it is. I believe it's more than just about the taxes. So I'm going to have to sign off now. It's a election night here in California. I think I'm going to be going to some candidates that I help support. And, like I said, if you haven't voted yet, you still have some time. Polls close in California at 8 p.m. Drop off your ballot. If you know somebody who usually votes, but you don't know if they voted yet, call them and ask them if they have. Drop it off. This is how we participate in democracy. We show up in the polls. We make our voice heard. Primaries are so important because this is also how we shape the Democratic Party. Getting a chance to uplift maybe candidates that may not make it through, but still maybe they will get a better and bigger share in order to send a message to others that this is the type of candidate we want. I know for me, a big thing was, are you taking money or not? Are you taking PACs or not? At the end of the day, I think that the root of all of our problems in politics is campaign finance. We have got to fix campaign finance. I will do another Substack because both Montana and Hawaii have this really interesting way of perhaps getting around um, the campaign, the Citizens United. But for me, this has become a big thing, is just because otherwise I believe they get too involved in trying to keep their job instead of trying to do their job, because they're too worried about whether or not their actions will cost them donors, right? Or whether or not somebody will raise money against them, and they just get stuck in doing nothing. And we have got to end this. And the first time in a really long time, there's a lot of candidates across the country where that is their message is, I'm not taking any corporate or PAC money. And that gives me some hope. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will be sure to share this. Thank you so much for being part of the community. If you haven't subscribed, consider becoming a paid subscriber if you haven't yet. I'm trying to continue to grow this because we're going to have some tough years ahead. And I believe if we're in this together, we can feel as if our voice can become more powerful. I know for me, certainly, I'm so grateful to have this outlet because I feel like we can all make a difference together. Otherwise, there's some dark news that I have to report sometimes. So thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Go out and vote if you haven't already.